Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome all of you to the NHRDN Mumbai's webinar sessions, which we conduct on every Friday or most of the Fridays. Today, here we have our campus leaders who will be volunteering the program, Mr. Cyril Varghese and Mr. Abhinav Joshi from Wellinkar. I would request Cyril to go ahead with the NHRDN Code of Conduct first, and then the program flow will be set accordingly. So, yes. Cyril, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima ma'am, and good afternoon, everyone. The code of conduct will now be displayed on your screen. While I read this, I request everyone to repeat after me while maintaining your session on mute. The NHRDN Code of Conduct. I will always strive to meet the highest evolving standards of competence in the profession and add value to organizational success. I will deal with all stakeholders with utmost integrity and create an environment of trust, leading to ethical success of my organization. I will ensure that I am always reliable and consistent in all of my actions by accepting responsibility for my decisions and actions, thereby creating credibility for my profession and myself. I will be objective in all of my actions and decisions and foster fairness with firmness. I will conduct myself in a way that facilitates growth and development of all those I am responsible for. I will strive to be a role model for all the others and champion exemplary practice of the HR profession. I will respect the rights of privacy, will not use my position for personal gains, and ensure that there is no conflict of interest in what I do with any of my stakeholders. Thank you. Now I kindly request Abhinav to introduce the esteemed speaker. Over to you, Abhinav.
Thank you very much, Cyril. I hope I'm audible. A very good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's thought-provoking session. This DEI-Progress or Pushback, hosted by NHRDN Mumbai. And as organizations strive to create truly inclusive workplaces, it's critical to reflect on the journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And are we making real progress, or is there resistance that is holding us back? To guide us through these important discussions, we are privileged to have with us Ms. Bhavana Mishra, a seasoned occupational psychologist, talent management expert, and a business leader. She is the founder and managing director of Basil Tree Consulting, where she partners with the organization to select, develop, and retain leadership talent that drives business success. Her extensive experience spans over 2 decades with key leadership roles at PwC, Arthur Andersen, and SHI, where she played a pivotal role in shaping cutting edge global talent management practices. Ms. Mishra is also a known executive director at Jivagro Limited and an independent director on the boards of GMM Florida. She holds a master's degree in applied psychology and organizational behavior from Delhi University. It is truly an honor to have her share her expertise with us today, and please join us in warmly welcoming Ms. Bhavana Mishra. Over to you, ma'am.
Apologies, old habits. I was starting to say thank you. Thank you, Pratima, for having me as a part of this session that NHRDN is hosting. I'm really delighted before anything else that NHRDN is continuing to be the torchbearer in doing what is right, especially when it comes to the people agenda for corporate India. So I'm really glad that you have picked up this topic at a time that couldn't be more crucial. Thank you, Cyril, for reminding us what the code of conduct is, and we promise to abide by that. Thank you, Abhinav, for that introduction as well. All I realized at the end of it was how old I sound, so I will do my best to keep this engaging. Thank you, Gopi. You seem to be the only one who's got his video on, and I tremendously appreciate that. Otherwise, we have a whole bunch of 30 plus little boxes, but that's all right. I appreciate everyone that has joined and those who will come on board. I think we still have people coming in, but let me start without much ado with giving you a little bit of a structure for what today's next 55 odd minutes are going to be like, right? So there's a 3-part agenda to the session itself, which you have seen in the learning outcomes that we have circulated. So we will structure the session in those 3 parts. I want to start with navigating what is going on in the DEI world around us and how it has been trashed by firstly the political interests, and then by a lot of the commercial world as well, and why. So we will navigate that a little bit. I want to bring the attention back to not getting distracted with what is going on in the world and the trashing of DEI to what the business case is. So I will spend a little bit of time on what the business case for DEI is and how that cannot be negated today. We will talk in this section a little bit about the context to India as well and what's going on in the DEI world in India and where do we stand today, and so therefore what the imperatives ahead of us are. So that's section 1. I will spend about 10-12 minutes on that. We will pause and have a conversation right there. I don't want to wait until the whole session is over for you to have to list your questions. So the idea is to make it as conversational as possible. So we'll take a 5-minute pause to answer any chat-based questions that have emerged until then, or anybody who wants to unmute themselves and please speak. The second section then.
Bhavna ma'am, sorry to interrupt. Actually,
yes.
Some of the participants are saying that the audio is not very loud. So can you just get a little closer to the mic if it is possible?
Is this helpful? I'm on audio sound of the laptop. So normally that should not be a challenge. Is this okay? Is this working? Yeah, Gopi, you can hear me well? Okay, great. Yeah, so let's work with this. The second section is really the most intense section where I want to introduce to you why we need a framework for understanding and measuring DEI in a better way so that people are unable to trash it, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that framework and how it helps and what you can do to continue the DEI journey in your organization. And the third section finally is to close, which is to say, how do we then continue our work and make sustainable impact as we progress? So at the end of each of the 3 sections, we will pause for a question answer session and engage with each other on what you may be doing within your organizations and what my experience is as a consulting partner. So without much ado, I will progress from here. And Cyril and Abhinav, if you can keep an eye as well on whether my sound is all right. And if it isn't, then even if you call me on the phone or interrupt me, that's just fine. Yeah, so it's right ahead in front of me. Okay, so on that note, let me just agree with you on, I'm going to skip this bit about Basel Tree. We've got a usual 1 slider on what we do, which is around talent strategy, assessments of people and talent and leadership development. But I don't want to spend even a minute on that so that we get cracking with DEI itself and what the agenda is. I'm just agreeing with you again on what it means when we say DEI. And I understand that a lot of you may be using the word belongingness as well and calling it DEIB. Really, frankly, for me, it is a lot of semantics at the end of the day, right? Beyond a point, new terms, terminologies will keep getting added. It does not matter. But the most important thing is that these 3 crucial elements, diversity, which is basically around how do we celebrate both differences and similarities across all sorts of parameters, right? From gender to beliefs and experiences and backgrounds and all of that. Equity is both around how do we create equal opportunity for everybody and treat people with fairness, right?
Hi, Bhavna. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Actually, you were not in slideshow mode, so we can just see the first slide right now. I just thought I'd inform once.
Okay, sure. Let's see. I hope that works.
Yes, we can see the slide now.
Can you see the slide now? Can you see the
Yes, we can see
diversity
the
and
slide.
inclusion slide? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's just quickly check whether the slides are moving. Can you see this next one as well? Crisis and opportunity. Can you see that?
No.
Okay, that's peculiar. Slides are not moving for some reason.
Not in slideshow mode, at least the way I see it, Bhavna.
Yeah, it should be moving in slideshow. Otherwise, it won't be visible very well. You see no movement still. I'll just unshare and share again. That might be helpful. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
Am I moving to the definitions now? Can you see them?
You're currently on slide number 1.
You still don't see crisis and opportunity written on the slide? Oh, that's very peculiar. I don't know what's causing this.
Bhavna, you want me to share that?
I will need to send it to you. We may lose a moment. Let's just give it one last shot. No movement.
I can see now.
Yeah, now it's changing.
Yeah, see it. Yeah.
That was peculiar. Frankly,
Yes.
other than resharing and stopping sharing 3 times, I did nothing differently. That's okay. This is why they say sometimes we don't understand. We just have to absorb something and get on. All right, guys. Sorry about that that disruption. So just very quickly agreeing on the 3 terms so that we use the same base and same understanding across in our conversation. So diversity being simply all similarities and differences, equity being the fairness and equal opportunity, and inclusion being creating an environment that makes everybody feel welcome, yeah, and heard and accepted and all of that. Now, let's move on to quickly what the resistance that we're experiencing is. And is this a crisis or is this an opportunity truly? Yeah. So let's come to that. This is my favorite part, right? Now, this may seem a little bit dense, but I'd like you to focus on the middle column to start with. And I'll share this deck and these slides very happily with you later. So feel free to ask me for those. That's not a problem at all. But my favorite 3 studies I have listed in the middle for you. Yeah. The first one is companies with above average diversity in management teams report greater innovation revenue. Then the second one, HBR. Across 79 large corporations that they studied, every 0.1 point improvement in DEI ratings on a 5-point scale. Imagine that, right? We're talking just 0.1 improvement rating resulted in 13% increase in what they call the change power score, which in turn resulted in better REBIT and better shareholder return and all the other financial metrics. Change power score is basically the organization's ability to be able to navigate through circumstances to be able to give better returns. Yeah. The third one, diverse organizations have 36% higher likelihood of outperforming less diverse companies. Why am I giving you these 3 different data sources? If anybody ever came back to you and said that, the McKinsey study is rubbish or was biased, or the BCG study, the whole world cannot be wrong, right? These are people who are designed and trained to be researchers and research specialists and have produced this data over longitudinal studies. Grant Thornton has been studying their Women in Business Index since 2004, 20 years it was. This is their 21st year of running. So we cannot simply trash that. And so we have to understand what is a political agenda versus what is commercial and business sense. And it's important for us to get that. The rest of the studies I'm not going into. To the left side are the academic studies, in the middle are the consulting firms, and to the right are another couple of consulting firms, CCL that you may have heard of, and Gartner, who's Gartner's business is data, right? That's what they produce. Where are we in India Inc.? Once again, I've got 3 data points for you, right? And I want to illustrate this to you. Number 1, as per the LinkedIn economic graph data, the percentage of women in senior leadership roles has been more or less static over the last 9 years. It's more or less static. It is ranging and hovering from 16.5 to less than 18.5% over an 8 or 9 year period. So for all the work that we may be doing, and I'm on groups that have, 800-900 diversity professionals, for all the work that we may be doing, look at the impact that we have around us. The number of women in the workforce has gone up. Yes, no doubt about it. But clearly the challenges are happening at other levels, and leadership hiring and multiple other myriad issues that we're experiencing. According to the World Bank, they validated this data that LinkedIn produced along with the research partner that they went to, a policy research firm, that too, not even a consulting firm with vested commercial interests. According to the World Bank, 16% of people employed in senior and middle management positions are women in India as of 2022, right? This is post-COVID. So again, you can see that the average is around the same numbers. And if you look to the right, the third one, anywhere between 1 and 3% of CEOs are women as far as the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies are concerned in India. It's that abysmal, right? So obviously, if the CEOs are so few, you can see that the senior management positions are barely 15-16% that we're talking about. India ranks at 133 out of 146 countries on what is called the Global Gender Gap Index, right? You can imagine what this means to us, right? So we simply do not have the option and the luxury of trashing DEI, because we need to see this as a business imperative. If we have to become the economy that India is hoping to become, we will simply need to, even if we don't want to do it for the goodness of our heart, we will need to delve into the talent pool that is the other gender. And I'm not even going into the other genders. I'm simply talking right now binary genders. And even that is 50% of the workforce that we're losing out on and not getting the benefit of. Now that's as far as the gender bit is concerned. We simply do not have data on anything else, right? As far as inclusion of all the other minority groups are concerned and the various diversities are concerned, we simply do not have that data in India. It exists to a very abysmal level outside as well, but we don't have that data for sure. So if you can see, if this is gender, you can't even begin to imagine what must be happening to people with disabilities or the LGBTQ or any of the other groups. So that's as far as the India Inc. is concerned. If we go back to what the journey of DEI has been, and this entire issue that we are experiencing today in terms of the pushback, we started actually with what we call the compliance era, right? Between 60s to 90s, when legal mandates took place, even in India, Mandal Commission kicked in, affirmative action was happening. And a lot of that set the context to what we call DEI today, but started either as regulatory actions or CSR actions by organizations to just build people in. So to start with, actually, if you really look back, it set the entire context to DEI in a very, very almost negative way. It simply said, oh, we need to include these people, so we must have reservations. As a result of that, and which was originally a caste agenda in India, even today, a lot of the people see, if you look at researches that have been done by engagement survey companies, the men folk, the male people who identify themselves as males actually believe that this is a subsidy and an unfair advantage being given to women just because you are needing to do this. And the reason is, I can see why now, because the entire first 30-40 years was completely compliance driven, and that set the tone to it. Finally, we had all the research that I quoted earlier to you emerge, and the business case emerged in the early 2000s and later, where the competitive advantage kicked in, branding started to take place, and the tech world was really kicking in at that point, and they couldn't simply afford to, as a business, to discard 50% of the population that was available to them as the workforce. And so they started pushing for this agenda much more, right? So the same tech guys today are in a very different space, but those guys actually led the entire DEI agenda as well in the early 2000s. Then the next 10 years saw a lot of branding take place, and people started to see it as companies were seeing it as a competitive advantage. So DEI and ESG were almost at the same level and being treated by organizations as a business imperative as opposed to something that was affirmative action driven. And then finally the pushback began again in the 2020s, in the last 5-6 years, because again, as I said earlier, economic downturn started to take place, lawsuits were being filed. Other people started to say that this is quota system and so therefore is unfair to those who have merit. Organizations also contributed to this by mixing meritocracy with gender or other minority-based hiring, where some of it actually superseded meritocracy as well in organizations, which resulted in some of this. So we've landed up in the baby with the bathwater situation, so to speak, in today's date, where it's really about budget cuts and the entire so-called anti-woke movement. And then, of course, you know what the Trump administration has gone and done. I'm going to keep clear of any political implications of that in India as well, and whether or not we're going to follow that and the alliance that we may have with them. But one thing that's very clear is that no statement has been made by the political powers to be in India at this point about any impact that India will see. And any statement that has been made by the Indian corporations has only still been in support of whatever it is that they are doing, and they've said that they will continue to do. So that's where we are at this point in time. So I want to summarize 4 key things, right? And that we must understand. So it's political shifts that we talked about, economic constraints that we already talked about, the perception of reverse discrimination that we talked about, and finally tokenism and performative activism as companies started to do, especially the DEI executives who were leading the agenda. These are the 4 groups that have resulted in a lot of the resistance that we're experiencing to DEI at this point in time. Before I go into the next section, a quick look at what some of the data that has emerged around us are. I've listed for you these 7-8 companies that have actually scaled back DEI initiatives, from Meta to Google and McDonald's, PepsiCo. They've all made some form of either public statement, or it has emerged through media and other journalists that they have actually scaled back, right? So you can see some of these are very large corporations that have actually scaled back DEI initiatives. But for every set of organizations that have scaled back DEI initiatives, there are others who remain committed to the agenda as well, who have gone out of their way despite the political disposition in the US, while remaining American companies, large corporations. They've committed to retain their DEI agenda. Why am I sharing both sides with you? Simply to make the point that while there will be quick fallout sometimes and realignment that some companies will have to the political agenda for their own set of reasons, there will be others who don't. And the limited point that emerges from this is that the core does not get negated. The core is that DEI makes business sense. It is not an altruistic need. It makes business sense. We have demonstrated that over and over and over again over the last 15 to 20 years. And we simply need to do what we need to do for the sake of growth and business impact going forward, as far as India is concerned as well. I'll pause here for a quick couple of minutes and ask if you have any questions for me at this point. Or any observation for that matter, if anybody has. Just a quick 1 minute or so, so we don't lose time at this. Is there, Cyril and Abhinav, is there anything in the chat window, or should we just continue?
No, nothing in chats as of now.
So let's continue for now. I think we're sort of warming up and have spent a little time doing that. Let me share, by now you have figured I enjoy data, right? Now let me share a little bit more interesting data for you. Now, in the US, you know Josh Bersin, right? Many of you will know Josh Bersin and Associates. They are basically researchers, and they have a lot of viewpoint and commentary on HR related work that is happening in the world, HR and leadership development and so on. So I personally respect Josh a lot, work closely with him in many others. Now, when Josh Bersin released a report in 2021 is when this report came out. They studied 205 companies across 5 different best of DEI lists, right? Now, all of you are DEI practitioners. You would go to DEI awards and ceremonies and celebrations and all of that when your companies are being awarded. Full credit to that. But the biggest issue that happens in the world around us is we have no idea what quote unquote good DEI looks like, right? So when these guys studied 205 companies that were listed on these 5 best of DEI lists, right? All of them who followed their own juries and had their own structure and all of that. Would you expect that there should be some agreement on the kind of companies that land on these lists? There should be some commonality across these. Would that be a fair expectation to have, that you should have some same set of people? Now, this time I'm going to insist that you respond to me. So I'm going to ask you to please put down on the chat, how many companies should have emerged as common to these 5 lists? Should the top look the same? Yes or no? Let's have maybe 5-7 responses if we can track that. Yeah? Or you can just speak up, unmute yourself and speak up. Would you expect agreement on who should land on these lists and how much?
Not really, Bhavna. I don't think so.
You don't think that there would be agreement? Why is that, Shankari?
I feel that there should not be any agreement when it comes to D&I. Though in US it's a different thing, but I still feel it's unlikely to have any expected agreement for this list.
Okay. So actually, if the parameters of DEI or any other aspect, by and large, for example, if you go for a surgery, right, a medical process, right? Now you will know that you will assess the surgery on a set of parameters, right? Technical competence, etc., without going into that. So you should have a set of parameters, and therefore you should be able to come up with a similar assessment, provided it was being done with the same set of objective parameters. And therefore, logically, if I may disagree with you for a moment, if 200 companies are being assessed by different sets of people, if my parameters were to be common, I should have had ideally some degree of common names that appear across these lists, right? But what actually happened is, of the 205 companies making these 5 lists, only one company, that is Accenture, by the way, that has rolled back everything and gone ahead and declared that. Only Accenture was on all the 5 lists. And only 3 companies landed on 4 of the 5 lists, and 9 appeared on 3 of the 5 lists. That's it. The remaining were all independent, all common. I mean, all distinct from each other, right? What this underscores, the point that I'm trying to make, is that at the end of the day, one big problem that we have with DEI today, and why it is easy for the anti-DEI lobby to sort of discard what we're doing, is because we don't ourselves have a common measurement criteria, right? We have a bunch of models. I've just picked up 2 as an example. One is Josh Bersin's model himself, and the other one of Deloitte. And I'm just using these as illustration. If you did a quick ChatGPT or Google search, you'll come up with at least 12 to 15 different models that exist today of DEI, right? Now, what happens with these frameworks, if you can see, is they are all static frameworks. You start with risk mitigation and compliance, and you end at accountability and outcome focus, right? Now, my concern with something like that is I may be doing very little effort, but I may be doing it at a very advanced level with great degree of accountability. So why is it that accountability sits only on top, right? It doesn't have to. So our issue is we identified 4 problems, and I'm going to propose to you a framework, which is where I'm going with this, it is an offering to you to consider when you work with your organization's DEI maturity. There are 4 issues that I would like you to consider when you're looking at any global model or the Basel III framework and thinking for that matter. The first one is that when you are looking at tracking progression from one maturity stage to the next, are you looking at doing justice to different variables in the DEI journey? And therefore, are you measuring incremental movement? Allow me to explain that as an example. Suppose an organization that is picking up only gender in its inclusion and diversity agenda, only gender to start with, and then picks that up, works with its business leaders and demonstrates fabulous impact. Would you give greater credit to this organization compared to another one that has picked up different diversities, is has great policies and processes, has adapted to LGBTQ hiring and people with disabilities and a whole bunch of other things? HR processes have also been modified, but the business guys are not involved in any of this, and you are unable to demonstrate business impact. How are you going to give credit to which of these frameworks? The current frameworks don't allow you to assess that. So it's important to ensure that the dynamism of what a company is doing, the industry context that it resides in, all of those various aspects are factored in so that then you assess the maturity of your own DEI process. The second one is that effort and impact are fused. That this is my single biggest challenge with what is wrong with the entire DEI universe today. It is all about effort. It's not about impact. We hope that there is going to be impact as a result of a whole lot of good effort that is being made, but that's like a kid studying for exams. You hope that it will also result in good outcome and it will also result in a job and all of that. But none of those are their correlational variables. They are not causal variables. So it's important for us in the DEI world to start differentiating between what we call effort, which is policies, practices, and all the other things that are being established, vis-a-vis the final business impact or societal impact or any other impact that we're going to make. The third one is focus is on metrics. The world has gone berserk in the last few years. And again, that's the reason why some of the legislation has gone after that on just metrics and numbers, X% higher, X% this, and so on and so forth. But that is not, it is still an input variable into the final outcome that you're making of being a more engaged organization or the final business impact that you are going to deliver. And finally, static frameworks don't impact, don't assess and track incremental progress. An organization cannot jump in its leadership maturity or DEI maturity from a level 1 to 2 or a 2 to 3 in a span of 1 or 2 or 3 years. It's a very long journey. But the DEI professionals, it is incumbent upon you and your accountability to be able to show to business that while remaining at the same maturity level, you are still making progress. And through multiple ways, because you can be progressing sideways to vertical to diagonally based on what is it that you are doing. In one year, you are looking at more inclusive practices. In another year, your focus is more on involving business teams and leadership. In another year, your focus is more on impact and its measurement, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the challenges and limitations that we experienced as a consulting firm when we looked at all the DEI frameworks. And please remember, I must also add that this is not a commercial offering from us. So I am not invested in, this doesn't result in us certifying anybody or, declaring you at a certain level, and as a result has no commercial gain or otherwise to Basel III. It is simply an offering to you to be able to look at DEI and your efforts in a more, I'd like to think in a more mature and a more holistic way, as opposed to a more static and transactional way. So please treat it only as that and nothing beyond that. So what we have done is created a framework for our industry. And I might add, some of you may already know this, that we have an ongoing research at this point in time, where we are actually looking at Basel III's, at India Inc.'s DEI maturity on all of these 3 axes. But maybe on that separately, we can take a minute at the end of the session if required. The DEI framework that we've created if you can see the axes, and please, if anybody has a question or clarification, please feel free to jump in and ask me right here, right? So we're saying there are three components to that. The inclusion dimension or axis that basically evaluates how broadly and deeply diverse demographics and diversities are represented within an organization. For example, is it only gender? So if you see the blue dimension that you've got is measuring the inclusion dimension. Is it only gender focused, or is it a dual demographic? Is it multi-demographic, or are you looking at holistic inclusion, things like neurodiverse and so on and so forth, right? So the extent of inclusion is the light blue axis, which we call the maturity of inclusion. The second one is maturity of accountability, right? What is that now? Accountability basically says, is this DEI a talent agenda or a DEI leaders agenda, or at best maybe a CHRO agenda, or is it deeply embedded within the organization? How deeply is the responsibility for the DEI agenda embedded across the organization? Length and breadth of it is what this is measuring. So we use a 4-point scale there, where it is fragmented, which is all over, to localized, perhaps with just the DEI partners and some business folks, to aligned, as we call it, which is really around business and HR, and the DEI entities are all aligned, and you have a synthesization of your entire effort coming together, to institutionalized at the highest level, right? And then finally, the impact dimension, which is the most important. It says, okay, great, you've got great policies and practices, and you have looked at multiple diversities, and you've done a fabulous job of setting up the organization's gear and infrastructure for inclusion. Fabulous. You've now also gone ahead and looked at great accountability, and you've got business leaders involved, may or may not have, but the CEO is a champion, the board is a champion, all of that is happening in accountability. Now let's see if there is going to be tangible and intangible impact that is taking place or not, and are you measuring that impact? Because what gets measured gets done. If you don't measure that, then all the inclusion and accountability ultimately is process work. It's like lab work, but it's not resulting in anything that you can visibly demonstrate to your stakeholders. So in the third spectrum, we are looking at impact that ranges from what we call episodic, where you hope that your, the mandatory POSH compliance training results in no incidents, and which is fabulous. Or episodic, which is, I have done some diversity training, quote unquote, as it's called, and I have sensitized people to being more inclusive in everyday language. So therefore, it's episodic impact. To a little bit more tactical, where you could have had some process impact and so on and so forth, to systemic impact, where business impact then starts to kick in. Systemic itself is a very complex level, where business impact is actually happening at the systemic level, where you're looking at innovation metrics, revenue, change, all of those kind of things. To finally embedded is where you know that DEI is now a culture agenda, is now a cultural pillar to an organization, and the impact that you are making, therefore, is not just organizational, but also societal. You are not just inward focused, but also outward focused. And you are looking at being able to make deeper, long-term, sustainable impact as a result of the DEI efforts that you are making. So this is the framework. Perhaps I should just pause here a little bit to ask you a few questions and ask you to ask me a few questions before I talk a little bit about the maturity framework and what it finally results in. Any questions so far from my participants, or comments for that matter, observation? You can just unmute yourself instead of using the chat window. We don't have too much time. So any comments are very welcome. Does it resonate with you as a DEI practitioner?
Bhavna, makes absolute sense. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, just that, trying to establish causal relationships, etc., beyond a certain point can it will reduce with absolutely agree on the overall framework.
Sure. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, we have one question in the chat
Yes, go ahead.
from Mr. Praveen Sathe. What is the possible reason for the pushback?
The pushback that we've experienced so far?
Yes, I think that's what he means.
Yeah. So that's, we talked a little bit about that, right? The possible reasons can range from both the political impact, obviously, that is happening and the issues in the US at this point in time, to a lot of the anti-DEI lobby, which is a result of economic crisis that is happening, especially that has been the case in the US in the last 5 years. And as a result of that, people have felt victimized because of DEI, and they felt like it was not being meritocracy oriented, but quota oriented. So a lot of challenges have come from there. So a lot of these things have resulted in the pushback. Okay. Allow me to show you some parameters now that you can consider when you go back, right? When you go back to your workplace, what are some things that you can measure your own efforts on, right? The first one is DEI immersion, where we are basically saying, what is the extent to which you have DEI practices embedded in your organizational strategy, policies, and culture? Do you have hiring processes, performance management, and various other processes accounting for DEI as an issue? So for example, are you looking at performance data, performance metrics? Are you looking at that to say, is there any possible unconscious bias that is taking place? Are you looking at your succession pipeline data to see, is that representative of of all aspects and all diversities that you have within the organization, and so on and so forth? The second one is target groups and focus areas. Which are the demographics and specific areas of diversity that the organization is prioritizing? So you assess your own DEI practices based on how wide your target groups are and what are the focus areas that you have got looking at. In India, and I want to particularly also emphasize on the fact that while it's easy to look at race and a few other things and gender in the West, in India, a lot of these target groups and focus areas are very subtle. For example, caste data does not exist in the country anywhere. We don't have that. So how do you address something like that not being a challenge in the country? Or socioeconomic status, right? The financial status. So some of these things are very important. Some you may be able to champion in a more direct way, and others may be a little bit more subtle. But what are the target groups that you are looking at are vital. In India, some organizations have been historically infamous for saying, oh, they only hire quote unquote that profile of people, right? I don't even want to go into what those might be, but many organizations have been known, they only hire that caste, that region from the country, or they only hire people who have, met a certain demographic criteria, and so on and so forth. The third aspect of inclusion is employee involvement. So you can go back and consider what is the role of employees that you have in your organization shaping and engaging with the DEI initiatives. This has a huge bearing, we have seen, in the success of the DEI agenda. So is it coming in from the people who are impacted, or is it coming in from the people who are setting the policies, which is yourselves and the HR and other business leadership? The fourth one is, what are the DEI policies that you have? What are the formal policies to prevent discrimination and promote equity? The fifth one will be DEI processes. How the DEI principles are integrated into HR and other organizational processes. This also includes things like structure, organizational, not just people processes, but also org structure, your product design and things like that, right? Your design into your marketing process. Are you addressing different diverse customer segments and addressing DEI there, and so on and so forth? And finally, infrastructure and accessibility. So I'm not, because of lack of time, going into the sub elements of each of these. We'll be happy to share those with you if anyone is interested. But essentially, these 6 are the parameters of inclusion that you can consider. The parameters of accountability are 3, which is what is the role of the board and the CEO? That is the most important. Do you have not just their quote unquote blessing, but do you have their active involvement and engagement? And are they partnering you in setting the agenda and the practices that you then follow? Once that is out of the way, the role of senior leadership, because they ultimately need to own the agenda, and the model, the framework that we have created gives greater credence to business running the entire diversity agenda, much like any other agenda, as opposed to HR and DEI practitioners like us who are SMEs and we hold it together, but are not the people who are ultimately delivering it to the line organization, or ultimately working with it as the line organization. And the role of all employees, which is it fully deeply embedded across the company or not, right? So those are the 3 parts of accountability. And finally, we have impact parameters. Now, this is most important, where we're looking at nature of impact, which is around how they have influenced business, employees, customers, and society. Metrics and measurement, and which becomes the end all and be all of DEI usually, but is only one part of our thinking, which is, it is important, no doubt about it, because what gets measured gets done, but it is only one part of it. It's not everything, right? So what is your approach to tracking, analyzing, and acting on the DEI data that is emerging? And the third is constantly benchmarking and communicating. Are you aligning yourselves to your peers? Are you getting impact assessment done by a third party? And are you reviewing the result of the actions? And to Gopi's point earlier, right, the causal establishing causality is difficult, but that's true of anything related to people, right? When we increase pays and hope that we will have greater retention, but that doesn't always happen because there are many other variables at work. But that's the job of the specialists, to be able to remove the intervening variables and focus on the direct ones, to be able to establish that causality that you are seeking, right? And I'll talk a little bit in a couple of minutes about a few organizations that have established this causality and succeeded in doing that. And so finally, what we say is that we basically say, for each of the 3 axes, you should evaluate yourself independently on where you are on that axis. The research study that we're doing, for example, what it will do is it will give every company a percentile score on where you are on those 3 axes, finally arriving at the overall maturity level by bringing the 3 axes together as a weighted average. But in that weighted average, we are giving extra weight to the impact axis. And the reason for that is, how much ever advanced your processes may be, if you are not measuring and demonstrating business impact, those processes are not of relatively that much consequence, because your impact then is very, very far removed for this entire DI effort that you're making. So there are 4 levels that any organization can be at. And when you group all the organizations together, what it gives us is the maturity level actually of India Inc. as well, right? So we're saying at an emerging level, strategy is absent or ad hoc, you're compliance oriented, early recognition of the need for DEI has happened, but efforts are largely uncoordinated still, by bringing in all the 3 axes together. The next level is that of progressive, which is actually a very good place to be. You have a defined strategy, systemic initiatives and policies are available, efforts are there to track and measure progress. At integrated and transformative levels, you've really taken it to the next level, where it is then either deeply embedded in people policies at the integrated level and giving business impact, to transformative, where you are actually then making societal impact and leading change for the rest of the peer group of your company. So today, if people say, oh, Apple does this, oh, Meta does this, oh, Google does this, that's because some of these guys, for good or for worse, did things that were marquee and industry leading. So people compared themselves to those organizations, especially those that did good work. And I gave the example of Accenture earlier to you. I'll pause again for a quick couple of minutes of any comments or thoughts from anybody before I go into the final section.
So there's a comment by Ms. Kanisha about the framework that love that accountability isn't just something thrust on the leadership team, but everyone in the organization.
Right. Accountability fundamentally can't be thrust upon anybody, right? Accountability basically measures whether it is deeply embedded or not. Accountability is simply looking at whether the organization has created a process where everybody has a role to play, whether it is the board or the senior leadership or all employees. So that's, if that is happening, that's where accountability is taking place. Okay. I wanted to give you some examples of companies that have actually in India demonstrated a lot of good work as well. And they have actually gone ahead and looked at some measurements that have taken place, right? And they've committed themselves to those and demonstrated business impact. So I'm not going to read those out to you, but enhanced talent pool, high employee retention, stronger employer branding, much better customer insight and risk mitigation. Why have we picked up those 5? If you can see the kind of impact that's taking place, some of those is on the HR function dimension, others are more customer and marketing dimension, and the third one is more business oriented. These are 3 global examples that we've picked up right now. If you're looking at Walmart, Vodafone, and Nike, each of these 3 organizations have actually launched initiatives. And again, in the interest of time, I won't read these out to you, but each of these 3 organizations have actually launched initiatives that have demonstrated societal change around them, whether it is, and especially the Nike one that has been a very, very celebrated initiative that they've made, where it has pushed corporations to address social injustice issues at a very, very large level. And a lot of racial inequality issues actually came into conversations in the US as a result of the campaign that they led, right? So Vodafone's initiative has again been extremely successful, where they've actually seen an over 30% increase in women holding senior leadership roles and been able to address gender parity. So a lot of organizations in India too today, of course, are coming with their second careers programs and so on and so forth. A lot of work has been happening around that. These kind of initiatives, you should go ahead as diversity professionals, demonstrate business impact too as well. Right, so this will result in the DEI agenda actually getting the credit and the budgets and all of that to work for us. I wanted to show you an illustrative example of a metrics inventory. Many such examples exist, but the reason why I'm showing this to you is you don't have to do all of this, right? But if you can get your organization and the senior business leaders to pick up which are the audience and which are the groups that you will be looking at and identify a few metrics to work with, your ability to push the DEI agenda will be that much easier, because ultimately what delivers sells, right? So if you are able to give that business impact to them and you are able to solve the problem that they are seeking, then our ability to get the DEI agenda to go forward is that much higher. Again, some other examples of DEI metrics being tracked as well. And finally, we've listed some 4 odd impact items for you, which is social justice, equality, reduction in discrimination and bias, encouragement of diverse perspectives within the organization, and cultural awareness and global cooperation. I'm not going to go into the details of these impact metrics, but again, the point that one is making is that if you are able to pick up even a few of these metrics and work with them within your organization, then your ability to take this to the next level in terms of being able to get greater commitment for your DEI efforts will be that much easier. That brings me to pretty much the end of this session, and there are three things that we have talked about as the big levers for DEI in India going forward. The first one is that we need to go beyond gender. Of course, we have to continue the work in gender, because you already saw that we have barely 16 to 18% representation at senior levels. So we need to continue the gender agenda, but we need to go beyond that. We need to have a more intersectional approach to DEI, which is not the case today. The second piece is that the DEI is data-driven and accountable is something that we have to push towards, right? So we lack measurable outcomes, and as a result, it is hard to track real impact that is taking place. So you have to be able to set diversity metrics and link that goal to leadership's performance across the organization. That is when we will be able to drive genuine accountability. And finally, allyship and inclusive leadership at all levels, which is really, again, to your point earlier, that's the only way we are going to be able to bring the leadership to be involved, not just with measuring them and their impact on metrics, but actually making them as partners in this journey where they become the advocates for diverse talent and not the DEI leader of the organization that is doing that. So when we are able to invest in this allyship and inclusive leadership, that's when your decision making will get that much more DEI sensitive at every step of the way, whether it's product decision or financial decisions or HR decisions or whatever else that you may be doing. But it is not going to happen until such time as, one, we look beyond the gender lens, two, we don't measure and track success, and three, we don't create allyship and inclusive leadership across the organization. So those are the three key things that we have suggested. I'm going to pause here and allow for just a minute or two for any questions that you may have before we have to come to a close.
Not a question, but a comment.
Yes.
I think corporate India needs to also look at influencing its supply chain, because this is not an agenda that should be restricted to just the organization. We have a large part to play in making sure that the supply chain is also influenced. It has to be more selective.
Indeed. I have not even gone into that today, because I think we're still at a level where we're dealing with and grappling with the basics right now, but indeed we do need to look at that. Supply chain is one, and the other is the entire product design and the manufacturing supply chain, the manufacturing chain, and the ability to think from a DEI standpoint that genuinely requires a cultural change across every organization that I at least work with, because they are not thinking diversity, they're not thinking inclusion when they're doing product design at all. It hasn't gone into the mindset. And that's going to happen when every leader that we hire and every leader that we as DEI professionals train and develop is able to wire their mind towards thinking DEI in whatever it is that their business goal is, whether they sit in supply chain or they sit in product innovation or they sit in finance or wherever else.
So we have a question in the chat by Mr. Praveen Sathe. Diversity is a metric and so may be easy to achieve, but inclusion is an emotion that needs real support and intention at all levels. The question is, how do organizations ensure that happens specifically from those who believe that they are adversely affected due to the DEI initiatives?
Sorry, say the last bit again, Cyril.
How do organizations ensure that happens specifically? I think what he means is that against those who believe that the DEI negatively impacts them. So how do they ensure that inclusion, that which requires real support and intention at all levels, is given importance against those who say that that DEI initiatives negatively impact? Maybe they are impacted as an employee. I hope I got it right, Praveen.
Praveen, would you like to unmute yourself and just make your point? I'm not very clear on what you're asking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is those who are impacted because of this negatively, will be the first ones who would, not be very open to supporting it. And so you can ensure the metric in terms of hiring, but actually seeing that it works on the ground needs the support of everyone, including those who are impacted adversely. How does that happen?
Yeah, actually, hiring is only one metric, Praveen, because I don't see why anybody should be impacted adversely. To your point, I have a slightly more fundamental issue to what you are saying. Nobody should be impacted adversely because of inclusion, right? If they're impacted adversely, it means something is fundamentally wrong in what was done. If you promoted a woman because she's not capable, but because she's a woman, then that's not diversity and inclusion in the first place. So if a bunch of men were impacted adversely as a result, of course, if I were a man, I'd be very upset with that as well. And it should not be the case. So the whole point, Praveen, is that my systems and processes need to be designed such that meritocracy rules. In that context, yes, I need to build for diversity. Now, I'm not going to go from 16% women in leadership to 36% or more simply by promoting women from within, right? But what it means is that I need to hire more. I need to hire at equal ratios initially, right? When I hire, after that they come in. If you see, I didn't go into the data today. We have 30% or plus representation at junior levels, and it comes down to 16. Why? Because for maternity reasons, for elder care reasons, and all those other things, there is leakage taking place in the pipeline. So I need to provide them resources and infrastructure so that they don't leave my workforce, and so there is fairness in the system. All of that I need to do, and that's when you will build inclusion in the organization. By virtue of being able to provide these offerings, I have created greater inclusion for everybody, not just the minority group, but even the others who may seem quote unquote adversely impacted as a result of that. I hope I've been able to answer your question. Happy to take it up offline because I realized we've overshot by 4 minutes.
So, Bhavna ma'am, actually, I have a question on my side. So I did an internship in the summer in a medium-sized manufacturing company, and my project was basically the Great Places to Work Cultural Audit Report. And what I realized was that when I spoke across to the different stakeholders in the organization, when I asked them that are there any budgets or is there any kind of initiatives that have been taken for DEI, it was frankly it was not there. And the overall understanding of for them was that we don't discriminate. It is purely merit based. Like if we get a candidate who's a woman, we are open to it. So we don't need that requirement. And the second thing was that it was a promoter driven company. So I think that at a granular level, all of these initiatives, they are long term in to see their impact. So how do you convince such these promoters that they will have an impact, that these initiatives will actually help them in their business, and that the overall cost benefit, it is actually good for them. And as it is a medium sized company, in the very beginning you had also mentioned that since 2010 there was the overall branding towards DEI, that companies saw that they could differentiate themselves from the others. So somebody who's not a very big company, somebody who's not in the public eye, maybe a medium sized company or a small sized company, how do they, like, how do you convince them that they such DI initiatives, or it is a requirement and they should incorporate it in their system? So, yeah.
Actually, Cyril, again, in the interest of time, I'll keep it brief, but really different organizations are at different stages of their life cycle, and you don't really need to convince anybody to be able to do something. If you have to convince and it is such a deep agenda, then they're probably not ready at this stage to be able to do that. The second is nothing beats data, right? For example, if today the universe were to continue the leadership in the women in senior leadership agenda the way it goes, if companies continue to do what they need to do, there is evidence that we will take the next 65 to 70 years, that's what the data has presented to us, before we are able to achieve gender parity at even senior leadership levels. That's how long it's going to take, right? So the simple point is that a lot of this can be addressed with data, and to make the point to them that they are not discriminating as a result of, if a woman is not coming in, they haven't hired, or they haven't, and so they haven't done anything negative just because they haven't gone out of their way to bring women. But you will have to demonstrate that senior leadership teams that have more diverse representation take better decisions, result in greater innovation, have better risk mitigation, and all sorts of other returns that you are looking at. So you need to go out of your way to not just not hire on the basis of meritocracy, but go out of your way to build your candidate pool such that it is representative. Then you let merit rule after that, right? And give credit to that. So my limited point will be data and evidence that we will need to be able to work with. If we keep playing on the emotion card and the heart card that it's the right thing to do and the good thing to do, that whole nice to do DEI is only going to cost us very dearly. I think most importantly, it is the measurement and the demonstration of that measurement that all of us need to lead with.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
So just a quick comment to say that the business case is most important. It is not just a nice thing to do. It is absolutely relevant for the business, and not just leadership buying, but involvement of all employees is important. So I would not recommend that DEI programs be introduced in a rush. It should not be because it is because everybody else is doing it. Unless you have enough discussions within the organization and adopt it as more of a value-based or a cultural shift, it is unlikely to succeed. The pushback or the rollbacks happen when the initial foundational work has not been sufficiently addressed.
Thank you.
Great. I think this pretty much brings us to the end of the session. I'd be very happy to connect with anyone that would like to continue.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I extend my sincere gratitude to you for your data-driven insights on DI's progress, setbacks, and accountability. Today's session highlighted the three key takeaways, as you mentioned, which is going beyond the gender agenda, which is ensuring that things are measurable, it is data-driven and accountable, and embedding the allyship and inclusive leadership, which is at all levels. The Basil Tree DEI framework, with its focus on inclusion, accountability, and impact, provided a structured approach to measuring DEI, along with the DEI metric inventory that you shared at the end. The real world corporate examples illustrated the tangible benefits of effective DEI strategies. And to sum up, a heartfelt thanks to NHRDN Mumbai for organizing this insightful session, and to you for your valuable expertise, and all the participants for your engagement, thoughtful discussions, and contributions. Thank you. Thank you, Vasanthi. Thanks to the participant as well.
I've shared a feedback link, so kindly request all the participants to please share their valuable feedback.
Pleasure running it. Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you, team NHRDN.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all the participants. Appreciate your time and engaging in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima. Catch you offline separately.
Yes, 1 minute. I want you. Yeah. So thank you so much, dear audience and Bhavna. Bhavna, thank you so much for such an enlightening session, and the participants also. The audience was really very interactive, and the method which you took, that like pausing in between and then asking questions, I think it helped a lot to all our participants to understand the session and interact with you. We have shared the feedback link in the chat box. I will request everyone to please give their feedback. Please take it now only because the moment we will leave this meeting, it will go.
Most are left already, Pratima. I think
Yeah, I can see that.
catch you.
Okay, fine. So,
I'll see.
however, those who are there, they can also, if you want to know more about NHRDN, somebody had asked, I have already posted the link and the NHRDN National HRD's link and my number. So you can get in touch with me for more information. Thank you so much. Thanks, Bhavna, once again.
Thank you, Pratima.
And look forward for future engagements.
I'm sure.